This is Medical Device Legal News. Today is June 27, 2023. I'm Sam Bernstein. On June 23rd, the DOJ and FTC announced a stipulated resolution with Easy Healthcare Corporation, including $100,000 in civil penalties, to address allegations that Easy Healthcare violated Section 5 of the FTC Act and the Health Breach Notification Rule in connection with its ovulation and period tracking mobile application. The complaint alleges that Easy Healthcare engaged in deceptive and unfair practices by sharing consumer identifiers without user notice or consent, including sharing sensitive personal health information with third-party companies, failing to disclose to users how those third parties could use their information, including for advertising, and failing to take reasonable measures to assess and address the privacy and data security risks that they created by incorporating third-party software into their application. The complaint also alleges that Easy Healthcare violated the Health Breach Notification Rule by failing to notify its users, the FTC, and the media of unauthorized disclosures of user information. The order requires Easy Healthcare to implement a comprehensive privacy and data security program and to hire an independent third party to assess its program for a period of 20 years. The order also prohibits Easy Healthcare from sharing health information with third parties without user consent, including for advertising purposes. This case is an example of the need for device and software companies to adopt appropriate privacy and security policies and practices and to review incorporated third-party software, even if they do not engage in activities that implicate HIPAA. The FTC and DOJ have indicated that they intend to aggressively enforce the Health Breach Notification Rule to protect consumers from health data exploitation. Certain states have also adopted privacy laws that may be implicated when device software companies collect, use, and disclose consumer healthcare information, and accordingly, software companies should ensure that they are designing their software and developing and obtaining appropriate consents, making appropriate disclosures to consumers regarding the use and disclosure of their information. On June 16th, Anita Louise Jackson was sentenced to 300 months in prison in order to forfeit $4.7 million for adulterating surgical devices used in more than 1,400 nasal surgeries performed on Medicare patients between 2011 and 2018. Jackson allegedly reused single-use surgical devices that came into contact with blood and other bodily fluids hundreds of times. Jackson was the top biller for balloon sinuplasty in the country, billing over $46 million. Between 2011 and 2017, Jackson performed 1,555 balloon sinuplasty surgeries, but allegedly only obtained 36 new single-use devices for these surgeries. When questioned, Jackson indicated that while she had the money to be able to afford to purchase new single-use devices for each patient, she simply chose not to. This case is a good reminder for medical device companies and their sales representatives to follow up with surgeons to ensure that their products are being used in a safe and appropriate manner. While surgeons and physicians are not technically prohibited from engaging in off-label use to the extent consistent with the standard of care, when device companies become aware that physicians and surgeons are misusing their products in an unsafe manner, manufacturers should consider taking appropriate proactive measures to seek to minimize patient harm. On June 20th, the FDA published a warning letter issued to Vitang Technology LLC on June 12th, alleging, among other issues, that the company changed the software that it used for developing treatment plans for its dental aligner system to non-cleared software. While the company conducted verification and validation checks on the software, the FDA clarified that a change in orthodontic treatment planning software could significantly affect the safety and effectiveness of their device, and accordingly, the company was required to submit a new 510K. The warning letter also alleges lapses that we've seen in other warning letters, including lapses in MDR complaint handling procedures, failure to validate the software used for its complaint handling procedures, failure to evaluate contractors and suppliers to ensure that received products and services conform to their specifications, failure to establish and maintain procedures to ensure equipment is routinely calibrated, inspected, checked, and maintained, failure to establish design history record procedures, failure to document personnel training and management reviews, as well as false representations that created the impression of official FDA approval on their website. This letter is a good reminder that manufacturers should carefully consider whether software changes require the submission of a pre-market application, particularly when software is developed by a third party or is swapped out for similar software, especially if software is used for software device functions. This letter is also a good reminder that any representation that creates the impression of official approval of a device by FDA because of compliance with pre-market notification regulations is misleading and constitutes misbranding. In this case, the website of the company stated that the product was, quote, FDA approved, and it incorporated the FDA logo. On June 14th, the FDA released final guidance regarding the content of pre-market submissions for device software functions. The guidance addresses the FDA's thinking on the documentation that sponsors should include in submissions for the FDA to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of device software functions. However, sponsors may use alternative approaches and provide different documentation if it satisfies pre-market submission requirements. As you're aware, the FDA's guidance documents do not establish legally enforceable responsibilities, and if and when finalized, instead describe what the agency's current thinking is on a topic and should be viewed only as recommendations. The FDA recommends consideration of the following consensus standards when developing software device functions and preparing pre-market documentation. ISO 14971, medical devices, applications of risk management to medical devices. IEC 62304, medical device software lifecycle processes, and ANSI AAMI SW91, classification of defects in health software. As referenced in the guidance, a device software function is a software function that meets the definition of a device because it has a distinct purpose for the product, either a separate intended use or a subset of an intended use. For example, a product that stores, transfers, and analyzes data would have 3 software functions. The guidance cross-references the FDA's cybersecurity guidance for additional documentation to include in a pre-market submission, and provides that software functions subject to special controls may require additional documentation. While not covered in the guidance also recommends that sponsors select a software lifecycle model or development methodology, such as the waterfall model, spiral model, the agile model, to develop, validate, and verify software. The FDA in this guidance bifurcates documentation requirements into 2 separate categories: basic documentation and enhanced documentation. The level of documentation required depends on the risks of a device software function in the context of its intended use. Enhanced documentation should be used where a failure or flaw of the software function could present a hazardous situation with a probable risk of death or serious injury to a patient, a user, or others in the environment in the context of the device's intended use, such as the impact to safety, treatment, or diagnosis of that type of hazardous situation. In determining whether to use enhanced documentation, sponsors should consider all known and foreseeable software hazards and hazardous situations associated with the device, including situations arising from reasonably foreseeable misuse and the likelihood of compromise due to inadequate cybersecurity prior to implementing risk control measures. The FDA also recommends that enhanced documentation be used for devices intended to test blood donations for infections, devices used to determine blood donor compatibility, automated blood cell separator devices, blood establishment computer software, combination products, and Class 3 devices. The FDA also recommends the use of a pre-sub to obtain feedback about a device's documentation level before actually submitting a marketing application. At a high level, the documentation should demonstrate the planning requirements, risk assessment, design reviews, traceability, change management, testing plans and results, and the other aspects of good software engineering for device software functions that were employed to support a conclusion that the device software function was appropriately designed, verified, and validated. The guidance covers 10 separate elements to be included in this documentation. A few of them include, for example, a description of the rationale for using basic or enhanced documentation, a description of the significant software features, functions, analyses, inputs, outputs, and hardware platforms, the risk management file and report describing risk management plan and risk assessment that shows that risks have been appropriately mitigated, software requirement specifications, the system and software architecture design, software design specifications, software development, configuration management, and maintenance practices, as well as an element showing software testing as part of verification and validation. The last 2 elements include a history of the tested versions of the software, including a brief description of all changes. And then the last element is a list of remaining unresolved software anomalies, including the impact on the device's safety and effectiveness. The guidance document also includes detailed explanations of each of these elements, as well as a number of related examples to assist manufacturers with developing this documentation to include in marketing submissions. On June 20th, the FDA released guidance regarding a pilot for oncology drug products used with certain in vitro diagnostic tests. The pilot is intended to provide greater transparency regarding the performance characteristics of companion in vitro diagnostic tests that are ancillary to an approved oncology therapeutic product, regardless of whether the in vitro diagnostic test is required to be submitted through a pre-market submission or whether it is subject to enforcement discretion. Thank you for joining me this week for Medical Device Legal News. I'm Sam Bernstein, a partner in McGuire-Woods Healthcare Group. I would also like to thank my colleague Sophie Morrows for helping to make today's program possible. I look forward to seeing you next time.